I'm so glad you're here. This is a replay of a live training I did inside the OTs for Pelvic Health Facebook group with Lindsey Vestal, and I wanted to make sure that everyone gets access to it. Pelvic health is such an incredibly fulfilling specialty, and it's growing so much. I've been training OT since 2018, and my goal is to have over 10,000 OTs trained by the year 2030. I'm so glad you're here learning about this specialty. I hope that you can join us in the OTs for Pelvic Health Facebook group with me, Lindsey Vestal. I will link to the group below in the show notes and description. Thank you so much.
Hello, welcome to our weekly OT Empower Hour. We meet every Thursday at noon Eastern Standard Time and have for almost the last 3 years. So there are over 150 replays available at the top of our page, pinned in one of the thread posts. So happy you're here. And I am so excited to be talking and sharing the conversation today with our own Carrie Gillenswater, who is an OT whose focus is really community wellness, preventative care, and she's a consultant with an expertise in therapeutic relationships. And perhaps most valuable in the context of our conversation today is Carrie is someone who is living with the effects of a fourth-degree tear, which happened about 10 years ago. Also, Carrie is a woman who has experienced menarche and motherhood, and she's preparing for menopause. So today's conversation is personal and professional, and I really think that it's this incredible opportunity to reflect on how no-show rates are linked to our collective experience of womanhood. So I reached out to Carrie because I saw one of her comments in one of the very active threads that we have here on our wonderfully prolific Facebook group, and it was about no-show rates. So I started to engage Carrie about it and found out that she had a wealth of perspective. So that's one of the things we're going to be talking about today. Carrie herself loves to wonder out loud with her fellow colleagues, particularly about how things are intertwined. So I know today's conversation is going to be a very fascinating one. She brings curiosity and commitment to learn from what it means to be dropped to substantially increase our, what Carrie calls our felt sense of holding and safety with ourselves, our teams, and the clients we serve. Carrie, welcome to this week's OT Empower Hour.
Thank you, Lindsey. It's very exciting to be here. Thank you very much. And to be with all of you who are listening.
It is such a pleasure. I always kick things off with an icebreaker question. It's lets you and I know, Carrie, that we have people joining us, because otherwise Facebook doesn't
Sure.
really give us that information. It also gives me data on replays so that I know what content to bring more and more to you. So if you are joining us, I'm going to ask you a icebreaker question, and please, if you're on replay, go ahead and throw the answer in the comments. But Carrie, I'm going to ask you first.
Okay.
And my question for you is probably one I've asked before, because let's face it, it's hard to come up with icebreaker questions over the last 3 years. So my question is, do you prefer soda or iced tea if you had to pick one?
Iced tea.
Okay.
Yeah. Iced tea.
Here's the bonus question: sweetened or unsweetened?
As a child, I would have said sweetened 100%. Now I would say unsweetened with lemon. Yeah.
Perfect. All right. I'm just typing it in the comments, and let us know what you are thinking for those of you joining us on replay and live. All right. So let's get into it, Carrie, because we have some awesome conversations on tap today. I got the privilege of being able to jump on with you a little bit earlier, and we already started talking about so many wonderful things. So let's bring the conversation here to our community. I want to start with sort of one of the topics we want to get into today, which is no-show rates. So in many pelvic health clinics, no-show rates can be high. And I want to hear from you, Carrie, from your perspective. What are we missing, and where do people feel dropped?
Yeah. So no-show rates. So one of the things I would say when it comes to no-show rates is in my work in therapeutic relationships, I used to go around the country and facilitate workshops about that. no-show rates was a common thing that we would talk about, like what was going on where people were no-showing and what was going on where they were showing up, paying attention to that too. And often what we would discover is people would think, oh, it's this major technical thing that you do. That's why they're showing up. You're more advanced at this technical thing. And what they would really discover was it wasn't that at all. And in fact, some of the places where people were more likely to feel judged, had fewer resources, were really surprised that they would show up. They were showing up because of that relationship. The relationship was non-judgmental, it was open, it was respectful. And so I think part of what I've witnessed and discovered is that relationship is a huge, huge factor for people. I would say, sometimes it's missing, but sometimes I think I would call it forgetting or underestimating. Like, it's not that we don't know those things necessarily, but sometimes I think it slips out of our awareness of just how important this is childcare needs. I think knowing that we don't always have childcare, especially if you have something like a tear and it happens at the beginning, you're not planning for that in your birth plan of how you're going to manage these things. And so having childcare, feeling physically, mentally, emotionally well enough to get to an appointment. I did ask other 4th degree tear friends and acquaintances, what would you want people to know? And their number one thing was, sometimes I just don't have the emotional or mental bandwidth to go to an appointment where it's so painful, either physically or emotionally, to do that. And so being aware of that, I would say another piece would be just dealing with the role changes of motherhood itself. Like when it comes to a tear, that's a lot, but now you're dealing with that on top of, whoa, I didn't even know this thing could happen. Here's what's happening to my body. That's another huge factor. Have people been dropped in the past? Sometimes it has very little to do with us and our relationship with them, but maybe they were dropped. When I use the language of dropped, there's a book out there called See Me as a Person by Mary Colorutis and Michael Trout, where they're talking about 4 therapeutic practices that we all do when we're at our best. They just gave words to what we do when we're connecting most, saying it's attuning, wondering, following, and holding. The opposite of holding is dropped. And those moments where we feel dropped and not safe have even bigger impact on us than where we felt held. So just being aware that sometimes a healthcare professional prior to us has maybe done some damage that you don't realize. I think that's another big piece. And are we checking on that? Or are we paying attention to how that happens? And I would say too, just what are our practices for no-show rates? Like if somebody doesn't show up, do our practices convey compassion or do our practices convey punishment? Like you have 3 no-shows and you're out. What does our language around no-show rates give us information about curiosity or judgment? So that's, I'd say, another piece. So those are just a few things that I would say. There's plenty more, but mainly it's really about us staying curious. Recently, I heard something that I thought was fascinating about a community health clinic talking about are we respecting the perspective of time from multiple perspectives, right? So there was a community clinic that was having issues with some people were not showing up for the appointment, and they discovered, hey, we got to go talk to the people who trust the population we're serving. What was discovered was you can't have set appointment times. You need to have open drop-ins type stuff because that just does not work for this population. So things that we might not think about that we've become so accustomed to, yes, you have an appointment time, it's on that date. That doesn't work for everyone for a variety of reasons. And how can we be creative and even how we schedule appointments too is one thing I would say.
Oh my goodness, Carrie, so much there. Number one, I really love this idea of approaching no-show rates with compassion versus a punitive approach. Curiosity is such a powerful attribute for not only us as practitioners, but I think most of us as OTs really excel and lean into curiosity and model that. But I'm not so sure we talk enough about that from the business perspective. And when I say business, I do mean no-show rates, because a lot of times the clinics we're working at are very much like considered a sign of disrespect, considered a sign of, a reason we should punish it. Let's charge this person. In fact, let's actually not allow this person to book again. And I think you're really giving us pause of, there's so many other things that could be going on. And, I know this, I have a weekly email that I send out to professionals, and I've shared that I had a 3.5 degree tear 10 years ago, and very much like you felt, fallen through the cracks. And so actually that was one of the reasons why my private practice in New York City, the Functional Pelvis, provided house calls, was this idea that maybe you had a 3.5 degree tear or a 4th degree tear, or maybe not, but it was hard to leave the house. Managing the role changes, the change in occupation, the occupational disruption, all of those things that happen. And also selfishly, to see them in their own home was a joy. To be able to take into account their environment actually was a joyful experience for me, and it served these other purposes that we're bringing up. So I just wanted to hint at sort of why my practice went down the path that it did, and really show respect to all of these perspectives that you're bringing. And Carrie, something you said, I started typing, and I want to make sure I got it right. And it was after you mentioned that book, See Me as a Person, and it was attuning, wondering, and holding.
Attuning, wondering, following, and holding.
Perfect.
So following, like suspending our own agenda and following what's in front of us, instead expecting them to follow us. So those 4 words, like I said, we all do them, but I think they just give us common language to describe what it is we're doing at our best. So
I love that.
So that's a great resource. And I think too, when I think of what affects no-show rates, is I think of back to my tear. I had what they told me was like the worst 4th degree tear, the second worst ever that they told me that they had seen. They said, we waited a little bit to tell you until after you were a little further along, but that's what they described to me. And as I was telling you, Lindsey, ahead of time, is that I'm stunned by, I have learned more from you and Janelle Gullen in the last year than anyone has ever taught me before. And so as another colleague of mine says, women don't even know they have a pelvic floor. That's information that they've never heard of. So that might be part of why they don't show up, is they don't even understand that's really a thing that's affecting them. And also our relationships with each other in the healthcare clinic, that we don't even know, like the doctors don't know to refer to us. Somebody tells you, oh, well, I don't know if that's really going to help you, because they're more focused on your internal injuries than they are your function, and how that affects your whole life and has ramifications. And so sometimes I think, so somebody says, I can make a referral for you, but I don't think it's going to help. How likely am I to get to that appointment and have a ton of things, and you've already kind of set the stage that I don't think it'll help. And it's not that it won't, they don't know what we do. So that's another piece I would say to be aware of.
So that's a great segue into the second question that I really wanted to chat with you about today, Carrie, which is like, what are some of the ways you envision spreading the word around pelvic health in a more accessible way, especially for those people, like you just mentioned, who may not even realize that pelvic health has such an impactful perspective on their function and on their occupations? Yeah.
Well, first I would say it starts with us as healthcare professionals, like we just got done hearing, I don't even know that much. I'm an OT. And whether I work in pelvic floor health or not, I am a woman. I'm working with women. I need to understand how pelvic floor health impacts all of us, even the people who aren't experiencing that themselves. So I would say educating ourselves better, because how does a profession that's 90% female not understand? Janelle has really helped me understand that better, and feel a strong sense of, we may have dropped this far, not anymore. How do we band together to figure that out? So that's one piece, is just helping us as OTs understand it by things like your work and Janelle's and other OTs who are involved in this stuff, to know who is it that just excels at this information. Some people can explain it in a way that people just get. Other people that is a little bit more challenging for. How do we organize our time to give the OTs who know how to do that well more time and space to use their time for that versus be eaten up by other things that maybe aren't in their wheelhouse. So that's another thing that I have in mind. And like we talked about before, healthcare professionals don't often realize what OTs do in general, even more so likely in pelvic health.
Exactly.
How do we build those relationships so that people understand how an OT approaches this? And that I think even not having OT as part of it is a big drop in itself, because we know how to ask questions and dig a little deeper in a more nuanced and both zoomed in and zoomed out ways.
Yes.
Other people don't even know to ask. So I see it as essential that we're part of this, really. So that, yeah, that's a little bit about the healthcare relationships. Also, how do we structure that? Do we build in opportunities to just trust that this is always in process? We've been having menstrual cycles for 1,000 years, and yet we don't talk about it very much. Not 1,000, but thousands of years, right? Since the beginning of time, and yet this is such a taboo subject. We can assume that we have work to do to get back to figuring out how do we address this in healthy ways. Do we have structures and processes in place that give space to do that and make it a normal thing to say, how do we get better and better at this? Always, we're always learning. Or do we not address it until something big happens? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but I think there's opportunity for growth there. So I'll pause. I have more, but that's some of the stuff that I would say about healthcare relationships and OT. Yeah.
I could listen to you talk about this stuff for hours, Carrie. I think so much of what you said really resonated with me, specifically the part around OTs being able to have this innate ability to ask nuanced questions that zoom in and zoom out. The relevance of the conversation and that rapport building is really our superpower. And, there's so much about OT that we could really look on the surface and think it's so simple. But that simplicity is so profound, and it truly does make the difference between us and other approaches to healthcare. And I just want to pause for a moment, because as I hear you talk, I feel myself being so proud of our profession. And I think the more we can remember that and kind of let that sink into our psyche, OTs, we should be so proud of our approach and what we do, and we bring so much to the table. So anyway, thank you for saying all that and for just inspiring me more and more to really reflect on what a power that is.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. I want to invite anyone joining us live, if they have any questions for Carrie while we have her. She is a very active member of our community. So I'm sure if you have questions and you think of them on replay, she'll see them come in. But if you're joining us live and you have any, throw them in the comments. Carrie, one question that I have for you is a passion of yours is that preventative approach. Do you have any thoughts around that for us OTs, either in pelvic health or not, just ways that we can be involved in more preventative work?
Yes. So part of what I would say is, I think always viewing ourselves, and you've talked about stories of people who had to step aside because of their own issues with their coping with their tear, that kind of thing, recognizing that we are part of the environment that's affecting the outcomes with our clients. And so what is our own reflective process on that so that we can help? That is one thing that comes to mind. Also, building our relationships. Sometimes I think our healthcare relationships outside of, because I see, again, our staff is part of the environment, building those relationships outside of the walls of our organization, I think are absolutely critical. And I do see that as part of a preventative approach, is if we don't have those relationships, it's a lot harder to deal with it in the clinics and in the healthcare system. So how do we build those relationships when we work in settings that often are competitive? The culture of a healthcare organization can be competing for resources. And I think it's important to identify the impact of that, of aiming for productivity, aiming for who's going to get the dollars to have this position, and how is that impacting us. So those are a couple things from that end of things. But I also would say too, when it comes to being in the clinic, how when you have children, they have developmental milestone checklists that you're filling out while you're waiting for your doctor's appointment. I am really curious about how OT could take advantage of that wait time and be part of a checklist that you fill out. Why are we not, checking in a way that is more meaningful and building relationship prior to needing us? As one of my friends had said to me, if you ask 2 really good questions about pelvic floor health that just help me even pinch my brow and realize I have a pelvic floor, you've done a lot of good. And this is talking to women who are 60, right? So we've got a lot of remedial education to do for women, and we have education to do from the time they're young. So how do we normalize these conversations? Even conversations like this today, I feel like the way I would describe this is, how do we turn what feels like unmentionable to mentionable and manageable? What's unmentionable is unmanageable is a term that's often used in addiction. That's part of what my background is, and recognize these are delicate conversations. But as we said before, just like your laundry, your delicates still get washed. That doesn't mean you put them somewhere and they're hidden forever. How do we do this in a way that bring things to the surface and to light? And to even know that a pelvic floor should be a place that we know about, that we have strength, that we have function, that it affects all these other things. And so when I think about what else is helpful for prevention, I think about, how are we reaching the community? Are we doing things like Reels, YouTubes, writing to newspapers, writing articles in various places, showing up in community education? How are we doing some of these things long before people ever need it, to make this a normalized, not taboo conversation? And there's so many people who do that really well, like yourself. How do we do that, and how do we empower more OTs to not be shy or not shy away from those conversations as well? So those, I think, are a few of the biggest things I would see as being necessary.
I actually have a checklist that I'm happy to give to anyone who would like. I did use it in New York City when my private practice was there, and it was, grouped by function. So it was bladder, bowel, intimacy, pain, and it was a checklist that I would give yoga instructors. I would give prenatal fitness instructors, postnatal fitness instructors. And it was one of those things where it just kind of, to start that conversation, sometimes a piece of paper is a really beautiful way to do that. And it also becomes a checklist for people throughout their life. So it's not just in that moment. I would tell people, hold on to it, because as things progress, and sometimes in pelvic health, things progress slowly. And so it becomes part of a habit and a normal, when you take a moment and kind of look at this checklist, you're like, wow, actually, I'm peeing about every hour. This kind of infiltrated into my new normal, and I didn't even stop to pause and realize it. So I love that. I'm more than happy to give out that checklist to anyone who's interested.
Well, and I think too, part of that is, for the lack of better terms, I don't know how else to describe this, but we can anticipate when people are going to need more holding. So I call it anticipatory holding. How do you reinforce at certain junctures where you pretty much know pelvic floor health is going to be more of an issue here? Do you do that after every birth? Do you do that when you find out somebody's pregnant? Do you do that when women enter different phases of menstruation? All these different times that are critical junctures, we do that with. We reinforce seams. We do that with buildings. What that's the collective womanhood thing that I see is, we know that about women. How do we take that? We all have a variety of experiences. We don't know everything. One person's experience is not the same as another. But if we don't ever talk about it, sometimes you don't realize, this is a thing I didn't even realize could be affecting me. So
100%. Lexi Martinez is joining us. She says, hello, great conversation. Earlier, Usha was here and she said that unsweetened iced tea is her beverage of choice. And then Jessica just posted a lovely comment, which says, I love this. It always frustrates me that we get education one time, and for some schools, 0 times to educate women on their bodies. And it's often at a time that we don't understand ourselves and haven't experienced our full extent of our own female body's abilities.
Yeah. And that's the other piece that I would say too, is how does this become more part of standard OT or education, is that, again, even if we're not treating the pelvic floor, we are women, and we know that we are part of the environment that is affecting the outcomes for our patients. So we all have stuff going on with our pelvic floors that impact us day to day, which ultimately impact how we treat. And if we're doing things like, hey, it's not cool to ever take a bathroom break, and the ramifications of that, or, we were talking a little bit earlier about different clients that we've heard, the far-reaching effects and the ripples can be really positive, and they can be really troubling to families. So just paying attention to things like, I've heard women say, you know what, in now in hindsight that I've had a tear myself, I recognize they were dropping hints that there was issues, like it's never been the same down there. Intercourse hurts, things like that I just didn't recognize as the tell signs of, hey, there's something happening. And so along with that comes distancing from intimacy. People would talk about, I'm faking a headache by 3 p.m. Just stay away from me. Yeah. And so along with that comes this distancing in marriage. And before you know it, you've got couples who are now, there's infidelity, there's major fighting, families are disrupted. And all of that traces back to the drop of women and the drop of talking about these conversations, and really a drop of all humans in that conversation, right? So it's time for us to go there. The no-show rates are bigger than the no-show rate conversation, and what can we do about it? And these conversations, I think, are a critical part of that. So I'm grateful that you asked the questions, Lindsey.
Well, what I've really hinted there at, Carrie, in such a beautiful way, is this idea that what could be perceived as a moment in time or an issue in a part of the body has such incredibly sad ramifications throughout a person's life that sometimes we don't even realize in the moment, and then it just continues to grow with us. And I think that's some of those conversations that my own clients have shared with me regarding that infidelity piece, and also that loss of intimacy that goes beyond the physical between a couple that is lost. Yeah. That sense of satisfaction, shared experience, feeling self-esteem regarding that intimacy that is lost. And actually we have communal goals as couples, and it unfortunately creates this huge divide, that, again, as occupational therapists, I think we have this beautiful way of kind of being able to see that. And so thank you for bringing that up, because that is a delicate conversation, but one that we need to have. And I have to tell you, the number of times I've heard that when I was seeing clients in New York City, it breaks my heart. So thank you for bringing that up. And I think anyone listening who can recognize that and realize that the amount of prevention, so getting back to that prevention question, that we can add and help shed light on a client's life by addressing these things is profound.
Right. Yeah. And I think it speaks to what can we do collectively to address the rest needs that women have? Because if you're lacking the emotional rest to really be honest about what's going on here, your mind's going with all the things that you've got going on in these different roles in your life. You have this spiritual rest of feeling like, can I even find do I belong anymore? How do I fit in? What is my role like? There's so much unrest in a lot of these processes that there's just so much more to unpack. And I really believe that by having those structures and processes in place that normalize, hey, let's just assume we can do better. It's not a personal thing. It's nothing like, I want anyone hearing this to say, I'm not judging at all. When people are not showing up for those things, it's just, we don't always have ways that we can talk about that in a way that helps. And that would bring me to a point of, I remember when I had my tear, you know how they give you those hospital surveys that are like 6-8 pages long, Press Ganey or something like that. Well, that's the last thing I feel like filling out when I've had a birth injury. And I remember it sat on my nightstand for like 6 months, and I tried to fill it out and I tried to fill it out. And so what I would say to that was, and that was almost like a re-traumatizing experience, having that sit there and wanting to say things. So I would challenge us to question, be creative about how can we have these conversations in a way that heals and doesn't cause more harm? Because sometimes our desire for data is hurtful. And sometimes even having a conversation like, how ready are you to have a conversation about this today? How, how well do you feel like I'm doing that? And just having a Likert scale might be something that feels a little bit less threatening to enter that conversation, or to prep somebody that I'm going to ask them about something that maybe they're not comfortable with, but I'm going to ask it anyway because I care about you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, those are beautiful suggestions. You are chock full of ideas.
Yeah.
I really appreciate having you on today. And I'll do a last call for questions. We have Jamie joining us, who answers Thai iced tea light on the cream. My kids just tried that for the first time the other day and absolutely loved it. They probably asked for heavy on the cream, Jamie. But if anybody has any questions, throw them in. And of course, on replay too. Carrie, you are a breath of fresh air and a true advocate. And I'm really grateful for your time. And thank you. Thank you for being on today's OT Empower Hour.
Thank you. Thank you all. Take care.
See you guys next week. Same time, same place.